The alien skyship broke apart in flames as it streaked through the dark clouds above Earth. A wounded warrior inside gripping the broken controls. Her name was Rava, a soldier of the elite Tharnax fleet known across the stars for their cold efficiency and brutal campaigns, but now she was alone, bleeding and falling fast. The escape pod shuddered as it tore through the atmosphere, the jungle below rising rapidly to meet her. She braced for impact, but her eyes were already fading into blackness. Did not know how long she was unconscious, but when she opened her eyes again, everything was silent. Her side throbbed with pain, and the cracked glass of her pod was smeared with her own green blood. She reached for her weapon, but it was gone. Her fingers scraped against the metal floor, but found nothing. Then she heard it, something moving outside, soft steps, rustling leaves, whispers. She froze through the cracked pod window. She saw them, humans, 4 of them, slowly stepping through the thick foliage. One held a metal stick, another had a strange glowing device, the third was crouching and pointing toward her pod. The fourth, a tall male with tired eyes, approached without fear, without armor, and most strangely without a weapon. He raised a hand toward her as if offering peace. Rava's breathing grew sharp and fast. Her mind screamed trap, but her body could no longer move. The male knelt by the pod and looked her in the eye. He said something she could not understand, but the tone was gentle, not commanding, not mocking, but sincere. He reached out, and Rava weakly tried to push him back, but her strength was gone. His hand touched her shoulder, and suddenly everything went dark again. This time, when she woke, the sky was gone, replaced by a roof made of old wooden planks. Dim yellow light flickered nearby, and the air smelled of herbs and fire. She was lying on a soft surface with blankets over her. Her wounds were wrapped in strange white cloth. Her armor had been removed. Her weapon was still gone. Panic gripped her, but her body was still too weak to move fast. Footsteps approached, and she tensed, ready to fight. Then the human male appeared again, this time carrying a bowl of warm liquid. He sat beside her slowly, carefully, as if not to startle her, and offered the bowl. Rava stared at him, then at the bowl. She remembered her training. Humans were savages, unpredictable, emotional, dangerous. But this one looked at her like she was not an enemy, like she was something worth saving. Spoke again gently and pointed at the bowl. She hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. The liquid was bitter, but warm. It eased the pain in her throat and chest. She drank slowly and watched him every moment, expecting a sudden strike. But it never came. He only sat with her silently, then placed his hand over his chest and said one word, "Jack." Rava did not reply. She was too weak, too confused, too suspicious. But her mind recorded the name Jake, the human who found her, who did not kill her, who treated her wounds instead of finishing her off. She could not understand it. Her people had always warned about humans, their chaos, their violence, their arrogance. But Jake did not fit any of those things. Over the next few days, Rava remained in that cabin, her wounds healing slowly under the care of the human. He brought her food, water, more of that bitter liquid, and slowly began teaching her words, simple ones, pointing to objects and saying their names. She resisted at first, but her mind was too sharp to ignore the patterns. She began understanding little by little. The way they spoke, the way they lived, it was not what she had been told outside the cabin. Other humans moved about, working, planting, harvesting, building. They did not look like warriors, yet they survived together, helping each other without command or rank, without fear of punishment. It was unlike any military colony she had ever seen. They lived not by force, but by trust, and Rava could not make sense of it. On evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees and the sky turned gold, Jake returned with a broken tool in his hand. He was covered in dirt and sweat, but he smiled. When he saw her sitting up, he pointed to the stars and said another word, "Home." Rava looked at the sky, then back at him, confused, unsure what he meant. She wanted to ask why. Why help me? Why not kill me? Why treat me like one of your own? But her voice still failed her. That night she stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, her mind racing with questions, her body still sore, but healing. She thought of her people, of the Tharnax fleet that must be looking for her, or perhaps assuming her dead and moving on. She thought of the mission, the battle, the hatred, and now this place, this cabin, this human who called himself Jake. Something had changed in her, something deep. She no longer saw Earth as just another hostile planet. She no longer saw humans as just enemies. She saw something else, something she could not yet name, but it stirred inside her like a spark waiting to become fire. And she knew this was only the beginning. Grava sat by the open window of the cabin, her side still aching but her hands steady. She watched the humans moving through the village, carrying tools, baskets of fruit, buckets of water, their movements simple yet purposeful, their laughter rising softly into the morning air. It made no sense to her. The Tharnax Empire had always painted humans as wild, irrational beasts, yet these creatures built homes, planted crops, shared food, and helped one another without orders, without fear. It unsettled her in ways the battlefield never had. Jack returned from the woods, carrying firewood, his clothes torn in places and a deep scratch along his forearm. She reached for his arm, without thinking, pressing gently against the wound. He winced but smiled and said something she did not fully understand, yet she caught one word: friend. The word echoed in her mind, clashing with everything she had been taught back home. There were no friends in the Tharnax, only superiors and subordinates. Weakness was punished, kindness was strategic, trust was a weapon, not a bond. To clean the wound with water from a metal canteen and handed her a piece of dried food. It was rough and bitter, but she accepted it. She had stopped questioning why he gave without expecting anything in return, though it still made her uneasy. Her instinct screamed that there had to be an angle, a hidden trap, a purpose behind his actions. Yet day after day he asked for nothing and gave everything she needed. Later in the evening, Jake brought a small device that glowed and made sounds. It was old and slightly broken, but it displayed symbols and images. He tapped it a few times, then pointed to a star map. She leaned closer, recognizing some constellations, but many were distorted or misaligned compared to Tharnax charts. He pointed at one distant corner of the map, then tapped his chest and said Earth. Then he pointed at another glowing mark on the edge of the screen and looked at her questioningly. She nodded slowly. That was her home world, far from here, nestled among dying suns and ice fields. He looked thoughtful, then drew a line from Earth to her world across the map and said one word again: peace. Her heart skipped. She stared at him, trying to understand if he was mocking her, but his face remained calm, serious. She did not know how to answer, so she said nothing and looked away. That night, as she lay in the quiet dark, she remembered her training sessions, the simulations where humans were targets, the lectures that drilled fear into young soldiers about Earth's gravity, its unstable weather, its terrifying species. Her commanders had called it the Death World for a reason. Its people were supposed to be monsters, yet here she was resting in a human bed, healing under human care, while a human guarded her door from wild beasts outside. Next morning she stepped outside for the first time, her legs weak but holding. The air smelled of wood smoke and ripe fruit. Children ran past her, laughing and pointing. She tensed, but no one attacked. Instead, a young girl offered her a small flower and then ran away, giggling. Jake walked beside her calmly, like she was just another visitor, not a soldier from an enemy fleet. He reached the river, where other humans were cleaning fish and washing clothes. Jake pointed to the water and said clean, then to her and said strong, then smiled again and walked ahead. She followed silently, not sure what to feel. The river sparkled under the sun. Birds chirped high in the trees and the ground was soft under her feet. How could this world be a death world when it held so much life? Ash sat near the water, watching it flow, when an old man approached with a carved stick. He spoke gently in their language, which she barely followed, but his tone was kind. He placed a hand on her shoulder, then handed her a worn cloth as if asking her to help with washing. She hesitated, then knelt beside him, copying his movements. She scrubbed quietly as he hummed a strange melody beside her. By the time the sun lowered again, her hands were sore, her arms tired, but she felt something strange inside her, a sense of calm she had never known in military camps, aboard warships, or deep in combat. She returned to the cabin as night fell. Jake offered her another bowl of that warm bitter soup and sat beside her on the wooden floor. He showed her a small book with drawings of animals, plants, stars, and people. She pointed to a bird, and he said its name. Then she tried to say it too, and he nodded. They laughed together for the first time, a real laugh, soft and surprised, like neither expected it, and it warmed the space between them. She did not know what was happening to her. She had faced death before, but this was different. This was life, and it confused her. But in the back of her mind, one thought still pulsed quietly. She had sent the signal before she fully trusted them. She had activated her distress beacon that night. While Jake slept, she had slipped out and called for rescue. Part of her feared no one would come, but another part feared exactly the opposite. Teeth wind rustled through the trees as Rava stood alone by the edge of the forest. Her eyes locked on the stars above where her people lived and ruled. Her heart twisted between loyalty and doubt. She had grown up hearing that humans were cruel beings guided by chaos and greed, yet every day on Earth broke those beliefs apart like old bones. She had seen their kindness, felt their warmth, tasted the peace they nurtured in this small village, but now the signal she had sent could not be undone. Her people would come. They would see this place as weak and impure, and they would burn it to ash. Without asking why, she turned back toward the cabin where Jake sat fixing an old generator, sparks flying from his crude tools. His face focused, his hands steady. He did not look like a warrior, yet he fought every day against hardship, hunger, and broken machines. Rava had once seen bravery only on battlefields, but now she saw it in him, in the way he smiled through pain and gave even when he had nothing left to spare. She approached slowly, and sat beside him, her fingers brushing a loose wire. He looked at her with that same gentle expression and handed her the tool. Without a word she took it, and worked beside him in silence over the next few days. She moved more freely through the village, helping with small tasks, mending clothes, carrying water, guiding children away from dangerous spots. The villagers watched her with cautious eyes at first, but their fear melted into acceptance with every act of service. Even the old man who once shook his cane at her now nodded when she passed by. She did not know why she cared so much. What they thought she was Tharnax, elite bred for war, not for approval, not for friendship, and certainly not for love. But the more she saw of Jake, the more that certainty cracked. He was different, not just because he was kind, but because he saw her not as a tool or a threat, but as a person, someone who mattered, someone who could choose her own path. She remembered how he had shielded her from the storm, how he brought her medicine without knowing her species, how he taught her to smile again. Her people would never understand that, and the more she healed, the more she dreaded their Rivaloni evening. A storm rolled in, dark clouds flashing with angry light thunder, shaking the ground. Rava stood at the doorway watching rain hammer the earth. The villagers rushed to cover crops and secure homes, but one child had not returned from the fields, a young boy with wild hair and quick feet. Jake grabbed a lantern and ran into the rain. Without hesitation, Rava followed him, her body still aching from healing wounds, but her mind focused, sharp and alert. They found the boy trapped under a fallen branch near the river, his leg pinned and the water rising fast. Jake tried lifting the branch, but it was too heavy. Rava stepped into the flood, her boots slipping on wet stones, her arms straining as she braced and heaved with everything she had. Jake pulled the boy free and cradled him against his chest as they fought their way back through the storm-soaked and breathless but Alavith. At night the villagers gathered around them, offering warm blankets and food. Rava sat beside Jake, her hair dripping, her hands trembling, but her heart calm. For the first time in years she felt like she belonged, not as a soldier, not as an alien, but as one of them, part of something greater than orders and ranks. Later, as the fire dimmed and the others drifted to sleep, Rava leaned toward Jake and placed a hand over his. He looked at her, surprised, but did not pull away. She searched for words in the human tongue, words she had practiced in the quiet hours alone with books and whispered lessons. Finally she spoke. Why help? Miyake looked at her long and quiet, then said, because you were hurting, because you needed it, because someone had. Tosh closed her eyes, letting the truth of his answer settle deep inside her soul. Her people would never accept this, but she no longer cared. If they came, they would find a different Rava, not a tool, not a killer, but someone who had seen the truth and chosen to change. But her peace shattered the next morning when a strange hum filled the air, a sound only she recognized, low and rising, mechanical and cold, the sound of Tharnax drop ships piercing through the clouds like knives. Jake stepped outside first, followed by others, the villagers pointing at the sky as dark shapes descended. Rava stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had called them, and now they were her. The Tharnax ships descended through the storm-darkened sky like shadows of death, their engines roaring like thunder and casting gusts of wind across the trembling trees. Villagers scattered, some grabbing tools, others hiding their children behind walls. The ships hovered, low black steel monsters with blinking red lights and sharp edges. One of them landed near the open field, and its ramp dropped with a hiss, releasing armored soldiers with rifles raised and glowing eyes behind mirrored visors. Rava stood still in the center of the village, her body tense, her breath tight in her chest, the memories of command, drills and loyalty codes echoing inside her mind. She had trained with these soldiers, marched beside them on foreign worlds, spilled blood for the same empire. Now they looked at her like a target, not a comrade. The leader stepped forward, a tall figure in a dark red cape with silver markings. His voice came sharp through his helmet. Traitor, you were thought dead. Your signal was received. You are to be extracted at once and cleansed for contamination. The word burned her ears. Cleansed, that meant reprogramming, that meant erasing her memories, her choices, her voice. She backed away slowly, hands raised, not in surrender, but to hold space between herself and the past. Jake stepped beside her. No weapon, no fear, just confusion and protectiveness in his eyes. The Tharnax leader looked at him with disgust and pointed his rifle. Your infection begins with this creature. Stand aside or be destroyed. Rava shouted no and placed herself between them, her voice stronger than it had ever been. She told them everything about the village, about the humans who saved her, about Jake who gave her shelter when she had nothing left. She spoke in Tharnax tongue, clear and defiant. They are not what we believe. They are not monsters. They are not killers. They are alive and kind and stronger than we ever imagined. The soldiers shifted, uncertain whispers passed through the line, but the commander raised his fist and barked silence. He ordered his men to seize her, take her back for reconditioning, and wipe this place out, burn the infection before it spreads. Rava's eyes widened as the soldiers raised their rifles, but before they could move a gunshot rang out. Jake had fired a single shot from an old hunting rifle. One of the soldiers fell back, clutching his leg. Chaos erupted. Villagers screamed. More soldiers stormed forward. Jake was tackled to the ground, his weapon knocked aside. Rava screamed and lunged. She tore a rifle from one soldier and spun expertly, using training she had buried but never forgotten. She fired not to kill but to stop the advance, to protect the people behind her. Shouted at the soldiers again, telling them to look, to think, to see what was really happening. Some paused, confused, others hesitated, but the commander did not. He raised his arm and aimed directly at Jake, who struggled on the ground. Rava threw herself between them again, and the blast hit her in the shoulder. Searing pain ripped through her as she collapsed, but she held her ground, blood pouring down her arm. She raised her weapon again and glared at the commander, her voice hoarse but unbroken. "You are not my commander, not anymore." Something in her eyes made even the Tharnax pause. The other soldiers lowered their weapons one by one, and the villagers stood behind Rava, not with weapons, but with resolve. Men, women, children, staring down the invaders without fear. The commander looked around, saw that control was slipping through his fingers, and spat in fury. He barked a final command: retreat. "The mission is compromised. We will return with higher clearance and orbital strikes." The ships lifted off the field, burning as their engines roared. The commander glaring at Rava. As the last ramp closed, she dropped her weapon as they vanished, pain flooding her body. Jake rushed to her side, pressing his hands against the wound, shouting her name over and over as villagers ran to help. Tears mixed with rain as she looked into his face and whispered one word: sorry. Shook his head and held her tighter. "Not your fault, not anymore." She had stood for something real, something hers, and now there was no going back. The village had survived, the humans had stood tall, and she had chosen her side. Night fell heavy with silence, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves and the crackling of the small fire outside the cabin. Rava lay on a wooden table, makeshift bandages soaked in green blood. As the village medic tried to stop the bleeding, Jake never left her side, his hands shaking as he held hers, whispering her name like a lifeline. She stared up at the wooden beams above, her pain pulsing in her shoulder, but her heart calm, because for the first time in her life, she had fought for something more than orders, more than survival. She had fought for him. Villagers moved quietly around the cabin, patching broken fences, checking on the wounded, comforting the frightened children. No one asked Rava why she had turned on her own people. They had seen the answer with their own eyes, in the way she shielded them, in the way she stood before those soldiers like a wall, unshakable, unafraid. Be morning. Rava managed to sit up, her body weak but her mind sharp. Jake brought her water and sat beside her, his eyes tired but full of fire. He told her they would leave soon. The Tharnax would return, and this time they would not hesitate. Orbital strikes meant total destruction, fire from the sky that could erase the village in seconds. They needed to find shelter deeper in the forest, away from the open fields. Rava nodded, but she knew it would not be enough. The Tharnax never forgot, never forgave. She stood slowly, testing her strength, and looked out the window. The trees swayed gently in the breeze as if nothing had happened, as if the sky had not threatened to fall just hours ago. She turned to Jake, her voice rough but steady. "We cannot run forever. They will follow you because of me." He shook his head, then said firmly, "No, they will follow because they fear what you became, because you saw them for what they are and chose something better." His words struck deep, not like an accusation, but like truth. Her people had always believed in dominance and control, in crushing anything they did not understand. But here in this quiet world, among these fragile creatures, she had learned the strength of compassion, of unity, of resilience. She had learned that survival was not the same as living. That evening, the village gathered in the central square. Rava stood before them, her arm in a sling, her posture straight. She spoke in broken human words, thanking them for saving her, for trusting her, for standing beside her. Jake stood next to her, translating what she could not say with words, and what she did not need to say with her eyes. One of the elders approached, carrying a long cloth, stained with symbols old and faded. He placed it over her shoulders and spoke softly in a language she barely understood. But the meaning was clear. She was no longer a guest, no longer a stranger. She was one of the Moss. The sun disappeared behind the hills and the stars blinked into view. Rava walked to the edge of the village and sat alone, her eyes scanning the sky, waiting for the fire that might come, for the warships that might descend again. But all she saw were stars, distant and silent. Jake joined her after a while, sitting close but not speaking. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, letting the warmth of his presence chase away the cold in her chest. She had lost her past, her people, her rank, her mission, but she had gained something else. something she never thought she would find a home, but peace was not guaranteed, not yet. She knew the Tharnax would not accept her defiance, not without response. She would have to prepare, not just to defend the village, but to ensure it would not be caught in the flames of revenge. And so in the quiet hours of that night she began to plan. She would not run, she would not beg, she would show them that humanity was not weak, that love was not surrender, that hope was not a threat but a force that could not be conquered. The village lay quiet beneath the moonlight, shadows stretching long and soft across the sleeping homes. Rava moved slowly through the narrow paths, her arms still aching, but her spirit burning with determination. Jake walked beside her, carrying a satchel filled with tools, medicines, and supplies. She had insisted on gathering everything needed to protect this fragile world she had chosen, and the people who had saved her. That night they sat by the dying fire, sharing stories and broken words and gestures. Jake told her about his brother lost in a distant war, how the pain of that loss had shaped him into a man who refused to give up on kindness, despite the cruelty he had seen. Rava listened closely, feeling a connection she had never expected, a bond forged not by blood or rank, but by shared loss and hope. She told him about the Tharnax, their endless wars, their rigid codes, their unforgiving demands, how loyalty was survival and betrayal meant death. She spoke of battles fought in cold silence and lives sacrificed for empire glory. But through her words Jake saw not a warrior, but a soul struggling to find meaning beyond the orders that once ruled her life. The stars above seemed to listen as the night deepened, their light casting a gentle glow on the two figures who had crossed worlds and fears to find understanding in each other. Rava's heart beat steady with a new purpose. She no longer wished to return to the cold void of space. She had seen the warmth of Earth and the strength of its people, and it called to her louder than any command. But the dawn brought harsh realities. The village was still vulnerable. The threat of the Tharnax hung over them like a storm ready to break their peace. In the early morning mist, Rava gathered the villagers, teaching them to use simple tools as weapons, building barriers and setting early warning systems. She moved with authority and care, guiding their hands with the precision of a soldier, but the compassion of a friend. Jake stood beside her, organizing the efforts, sharing stories of his own people's resilience and survival, teaching her about the power of community and trust. The villagers worked tirelessly, their fear tempered by hope and the fierce will of the alien soldier who had chosen them. As her own days turned into weeks, and Rava found herself becoming part of the rhythm of the village. She helped harvest crops, mended clothes, cared for the sick, and listened to the laughter of children as they played games. She no longer felt like a stranger, an invader, or a traitor, but as a protector, a guardian of a new family. One afternoon, a faint signal crackled from a hidden device she had found in the woods, a communication beacon from her fleet. But the message was different than expected, a voice cold and commanding, ordering her to return to the Tharnax ship for immediate debriefing and reconditioning. Refusal would mean permanent exile in Erasura. Rava stared at the device, her hands trembling. She thought of Jake, the villagers, the life she had built, and the war she had left behind. She realized she was at a crossroads, not just between two worlds, but between two selves, the soldier trained to obey and the woman who had learned to choose. Ash looked up at the sky where the stars shone bright and steady, then down at Jake, who waited silently by her side with trust and understanding in his eyes, and made her decision. She crushed the device beneath her boot, letting the pieces fall into the earth that had become her home. From that day forward, Rava vowed to defend this village, not just with weapons, but with every part of her being. She trained with the villagers, taught them strategy and discipline, shared her knowledge of alien technology, and learned from their resilience and ingenuity. Together, they forged a bond stronger than any empire's command. An evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of fire and gold, Rava stood at the edge of the forest, watching a small scout ship land quietly nearby. A young alien emerged, its eyes wide with shock and confusion. She stepped forward, smiling gently, holding out her hand not as a warrior, but as a friend, a bridge between two worlds. Scout looked at her with questions, but something in her calm presence reassured him. He lowered his weapon and listened as she began to tell the story of the humans who saved her and the choice she made to protect them, the story that would change the course of the war and perhaps the future of both species. Rava stood tall in the soft morning light, the village waking around her, birds singing, children laughing, and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. She no longer wore the cold armor of the Tharnax, but simple clothes woven by the hands of the villagers. Her scarred shoulder a reminder of battles fought not just against enemies, but within herself. She breathed deeply, the earth beneath her feet steady and real, and filled with hope. The young scout who had landed days before sat nearby, Speaking quietly with Jake and the village elders, the alien's eyes were wide, but his posture relaxed, as he listened to their stories of survival, unity, and courage he had come to learn, not just to scout but to understand, to see beyond the war and the hatred that had blinded his people for so long. Grava approached him, her steps slow but confident. She extended a hand, not in command, but in peace. The scout hesitated, then took it gently, his grip firm and curious. In that moment a bridge was built between two worlds, two species that had known nothing but conflict, now bound by a fragile hope for a different future. Ash spoke to him of Earth, of its beauty and its strength, of the humans who had saved her when she was broken, and the choice she made to stand with them, not against them. She told him about the pain of betrayal and the power of forgiveness, about the courage it took to change and the peace that came with it. The scout listened without interrupting, his expression softening as he saw the truth in her words. Back in the village, Jake stood watching the two aliens with a smile on his face, a smile born from years of hardship and loss, but also from the belief that even in the darkest times light could be found and nurtured, if one only dared to hope. Days passed, and the scout returned to his fleet, carrying with him a message of peace and understanding, a message forged in the heart of a wounded soldier who chose humanity over war. His story spread slowly through the stars, challenging old beliefs and stirring conversations among those who had long thought the conflict endless. Rava found herself walking the village paths with a new purpose. She was no longer a stranger, no longer a prisoner of her past, but a beacon of change, a living proof that even the deepest hatred could be overcome by compassion and choice. She helped the villagers build stronger homes, shared her knowledge of technology and medicine, and trained the young to protect their home with skill and wisdom. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake took her hand and led her to the top of a hill overlooking the village. The wind whispered softly, and the stars began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. They stood in silence, watching the world below, a world they had helped to save and rebuild. Rava turned to Jake, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude and hope. She whispered words she had learned slowly over time, words filled with meaning and truth. "I am home," she said, not just in place but in heart. Smiled and pulled her close together. They looked at the sky where distant stars shone bright, their light crossing unimaginable distances to reach them, a reminder that no matter how far apart worlds might be, the bonds of kindness and courage could unite them forever. The war was not over and challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Rava believed in something more than duty. She believed in choice and love, and the power of humanity to change the course of history, one act of kindness at a time. And so the story of the wounded alien soldier who was rescued by humans became a legend, not just on Earth, but across the stars, a story told to inspire peace and courage, to remind all beings that even in the darkest moments, the light of hope can shine brighter than any weapon. Dawn broke soft and golden over the quiet village, where Rava stood watching the gentle light touch the trees, the faces of those she had come to love and protect. Her heart swelled with a feeling she never knew possible, belonging not to an empire but to a family born not from blood but from choice and courage. Around her the villagers moved with purpose and peace, their laughter filling the air like music, and Jake stood beside her, steady, strong, a silent promise in his eyes that whatever came next they would face it together. The stars above twinkled faintly, a reminder of distant worlds, wars lost and lives changed forever. Rava breathed deep, the weight of her past lifted, replaced by hope and determination. She reached into the fire and burned the last piece of her old armor, watching the flames carry away the pain, the orders, the hate, and as the smoke rose high into the endless sky, she smiled, knowing she had found something no battle could take away: the strength to choose love over fear, to stand for peace when all seemed lost, to be human in the truest sense of the word. This was her home now, and no matter where the stars led her next, she would carry that truth inside her forever. The end.